Hello and welcome. I'm Rohit Gandhi and you're watching Democracy and Dictatorship. Thank you for joining us each week as we unraveled and delved into some of the most crucial issues affecting our societies. For this episode, our focus is black money. The recent demonetization the government of India has executed, to say the least, has been challenging. While the concept overall will leave a lasting legacy, but in the short term, it has meant inconvenience for people living on the cash economy. Our aim in the next half hour is to look at the process of demonetization, the banking situation in South Asia, and what this entire move will be about, the pros and cons of such a decision. They need to be understood. To start things off, here's our correspondent Manoj Kevalramani taking a look at the history of demonetization in India, because this isn't the first time it has happened.
500 rupee and 1000 rupee currency notes presently in use will no longer be legal tender.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's announcement withdrawing the 500 and 1000 rupee notes from circulation has caught many in the country by surprise. While the sudden nature of the decision has taken people aback, demonetization isn't without precedent in India. In fact, it is a step that has been taken twice before in recent history. The first instance was just before independence. In January 1946, the government withdrew the 1000 and 10,000 rupee notes. Just 8 years later, those notes were reintroduced, along with a new 5,000 rupee note. All three of those banknotes were then withdrawn again in 1978. In 1987, the Reserve Bank of India introduced a new 500 rupee note. 13 years later, it also reintroduced the 1000 rupee note. Both of those notes were introduced to restrict the number of notes in circulation in order to curb inflation. The latest move by the Narendra Modi-led government is reminiscent of the 1978 decision. In that instance too, the announcement was sudden, with banks remaining closed on the day that followed. What's more, the 1978 demonetization was also carried out in the name of targeting black money. But the impact of the move remains debatable, given that the black economy has only grown over the years. Likewise, it remains to be seen if the Modi government's latest gambit will be able to stem the black money menace.
Despite the similarities, there are major differences between the demonetization efforts of 1978 and 2016. Back then, it impacted less than 1% of the cash in circulation. In contrast, the Modi government's current move impacts nearly 86% of the cash in circulation in the country. Those figures in themselves underline the challenges that now lie before the government. In India's National Capital Region, this is Manoj Kevalramani, WION.
Moving out to another South Asian country, we have Myanmar, where banks are sparse and seldom used by a population which has vivid memories of the former military regime's corrupt rule. Transporting money has long been a pricey and time-consuming business. So the country's new civilian government is banking on a shortcut, mobile money. Here's that story.
For Kin Myint Oo, sending money home to rural Myanmar used to involve long walks or bicycle rides to the nearest bank. Now, it's as easy as sending a text. She recently began using a mobile money service, which lets her deposit and send cash from her phone via an app or at small shops like this one.
The advantage is that it now takes very little time to transfer the money. The process will be finished in 10 or 15 minutes, and then the children reply to me that they have received it.
Like 90% of the population, Kin Myint Oo doesn't have a bank account. But even for those that do, using them can be tricky. ATMs are few and far between, and residents of this suburb near Yangon have to take a boat to reach their closest branch. Myanmar's banking sector withered during decades of military dictatorship, and many people still prefer to store their savings under the proverbial mattress or convert them into gold or gemstones.
Building customer trust is going to be the biggest issue here, to my mind. I think there isn't a lot of trust in the financial sector, given the history of demonetisation and bank runs and so on. So the average consumer generally will feel probably more comfortable keeping their money at home rather than keeping it actually in a bank.
These new banking services have only been made possible by rapid advances in technology. In just a few years, smartphones have become commonplace throughout Myanmar, and some consumers could bypass bricks and mortar banks entirely.
When this service becomes more popular, it will be much more helpful than the banks, because it will allow people to save and withdraw money at any time. Banks are only able to do this during office hours.
Mobile banking was only given the go-ahead by the government in April, so for now uptake is still quite slow. But with Myanmar's economy growing at around 8% a year, more and more people are likely to need ways to store and send cash.
It isn't just developing countries like Myanmar. Countries like Sweden have also made a transition towards cashless. It was the high crime rate that led to creating such a cashless society there. In India as well, the cash economy has been a source of exploitation and corruption. Nobody knows where the money comes from and where it goes and for what. This creates a system that is ridden with potholes. Let's take a short break now. When we return, we're going to take this conversation forward. We are joined by India's former finance secretary and a partner at the KPMG. Stay tuned for that. Welcome back to the show. We're joined by Ashok Jha, the former finance secretary of the Government of India, and Jayjeet Bhattacharya, who is a professor at IIT Delhi and a partner with KPMG. Thank you both for being here. Let's start by asking you, Mr. Jha, you've been on the government side of this. What do you think of the move?
Well, I think I would analyze it in 4 different ways. Number one, objective. Now, was it a good objective that was sought to be met? I don't think there can be any difference of opinion that the objective of removing black money from the system was a very laudable one. The second prism would be whether this was the right instrument to achieve that objective. There can be a debate on this, but I personally feel that the system needed a big shock, and demonetization has delivered that shock. The third would be were we well prepared to carry out this objective. I think there one must say that we could have done better. The preparations could have been much, much better. And fourthly, one would look at it politically, because all actions of all governments in democracies are necessarily political. I think politically it's a masterstroke.
Jayjeet, let's get down to the basics. Your first thoughts on what demonetization has done today?
The demonetization initiative per se was, as Mr. Jha pointed out, to weed out black money. And that's just one aspect of the move. There are obviously other aspects such as terrorism, national security, also from a social perspective, a sense of equalization in some sense. And where the thought is coming from is the fact that millions of people in this country has been observing that an enormous amount of money has been siphoned out as corruption, as payoffs, kickbacks. The popular view is that politicians have been involved in such activities. The rich people are being unduly getting benefited from the existing structure. When the masses see a move which impacts such unacceptable behavior among people that they can't reach out to in that sense, there is a sense of social satisfaction. So it's a move which is both an economic move as well as a social move, which is what leads to the political benefit that Mr. Jha was talking about. So there is a sense of retribution in that sense that people feel that this move is bringing in.
If you look at economies around the world, at least the advanced economies, a large part of the population pays taxes. India, as low as 3%. Are the rest of the 97% of the population, first of all, making that much money? 2, are they ready to pay taxes? Let's start by you, Jayjeet.
Let me clarify. Within that 3%, only half of them actually pay taxes. So 3% file their returns, only half of them pay the taxes. But we're talking about direct taxes. When we talk about indirect taxes, everybody is paying, and the poorest of the poor are paying a disproportionately higher percentage of their income as taxes. because they need to buy things which are having indirect taxes. So with that structure, one of the options could be that why have direct taxes at all? Why not move to a regime of indirect taxes, especially where you're bringing in GST, where tax evasion becomes that much more difficult to do?
You were the finance secretary. How, when you went out to tax people with a 35% tax bracket, what was the thinking behind it? Why would the 1%, that time, I know when you were the finance secretary, it was only about 1% of the population which was actually paying taxes. How's the justification?
See, essentially, when we say that 1 or 3% people pay income taxes, one has to realize that agriculture as a sector is not taxed. And bulk of our people in India, close to now 52%, derive their income from agricultural operations. So you are straight away excluding 50% of the people. Then you have a poverty level in the country which, regardless of which measure you take, whether the latest measure, Tendulkar measure, or the other measures, you are looking at least 25 to 28% of the people that are below the poverty line. Now clearly they cannot, I mean they're not eligible to pay taxes, income taxes. If you take the other studies that have been done, which shows that more than 75% of the population of this country manages with less than $2 a day. Now surely one can't be looking at them to pay taxes. So therefore, if you whittle it down from all these angles, you are left with 1 or 3%. Of course, the issue here is that even this 3% or 1% that pay taxes, a lot of them underreport their incomes. A lot of them, more people could get included in that, into that category who should be taxed, and they are avoiding paying taxes. So essentially, the system has to come down heavily on those people who are trying to evade taxes.
Let's try and break down. What does this demonetization achieve? We know it achieves. Can you help break down? Does it bring down corruption? Does it bring down a more organized system?
What this demonetization does is, one, impacts the cash in hand black money. There's also black money which is being used for doing transactions, which is in the move. So this definitely impacts the black money which is cash in hand. Moving forward, whenever you do a transaction, you need to liquidate your other asset classes, make it a cash, and then do the transaction, unless you're saying I'll pay you in gold, which is also possible. But realistically speaking, most of the transaction will happen through cash. And therefore, willy-nilly, when your existing black money is saved in either of the asset classes of gold or overseas assets or real estate, you need to liquidate it to make a transaction. When you liquidate it, hopefully the transform systems will catch that process and will make you accountable to the existing taxation system. That's what it is doing in terms of black money. In terms of the other aspects such as security, terrorism and so on, as per the anecdotal evidence and as per the media reports, what we clearly see is that violence in Kashmir has significantly diminished. Violence in Naxal areas have significantly diminished. In fact, I was in Raipur yesterday and we spoke to a few people, and it seems that even the Naxal movements have come down quite significantly. So clearly there is an impact happening, at least on the immediate basis, on these movements. We don't know whether in the long term these violence will come back once the full amount of cash is available in the economy. But in the short run, clearly this has had an impact. The third aspect, which we typically don't take up in a normal conversation, is the political impact. Much of the elections is a known fact that it's run on money. Many of the elections have situations where money is paid off to the voters. That distorts the whole process of democracy. So we have a faulty democratic system because we have a faulty economic situation, a faulty money supply situation. So clearly it will lead to a bit of cleaning up of the political system and the democracy. So these are the impacts that we see that will be coming in.
Let's look at the other parts of this demonetization. They talked about fake currency, but it's a very small, minuscule part, but certainly plays a role in how it skews the system. Can you, the Indian government did talk about, we wanted to get rid of fake currency, and that's why we've implemented this as well. How reasonable is that?
In fact, when you asked about what the implications, I did not pick up fake currency for the reason being that we don't know how secure are the new notes. So if fake currency was an issue, what stops it from coming back after December 31st? But obviously fake currency plays an important role. Many of the terrorist, drug-related issues, drug trafficking is being induced by fake currency, and also has an impact on the total monetary system in that sense. But will this move be able to curb fake currency is something that's still, the jury is still out on that, we don't know. But the other aspect would be of this whole move is the fact that it pushes a lot of money back into the banking system per se. As of now, what was happening is we had the capital as a complete economy, but that capital was not going back into the banking system, which implied that it was not being used for productive usage, which meant that the cost of capital was high, and therefore many of the infrastructure projects could not be executed because there would not be enough returns to justify that cost of capital, and therefore you would be in a situation where we are paying taxes, but the government is saying that infrastructure has to be done on a PPP basis, and therefore we end up paying even more for basic infrastructure. And many of those PPPs end up not happening because the cost of capital is high, besides many other issues.
Absolutely.
So this is a vicious cycle that we are trapped in.
Yeah, cost of capital is certainly a very big one, and certainly having the leverage of a system with enough money in it. We're going to take a short break now. More on demonetization and what's happening in India when we return. Welcome back to Democracy and Dictatorship. We've been speaking with Ashok Jha and Jayajit Bhattacharya about black money and the recent decision of the Indian government to demonetize. Talking about money sitting in people's boxes, literally, and not sitting in banks where it can be used as capital to bring the country forward. How much of a change are we going to see? Are we going to see lower interest rates going forward?
Let's look at the dimensions. As per the methodology used by World Bank and then that was used by the government, about 30% of the economy is black money. Again, it's an estimate. If we knew how much was black money, then there would be no black money by definition. But it's an estimate. If that's the case, and the cash that was taken out was about 10% of the economy, and as of day before yesterday, only about 7% of the cash, 7% total value of cash has come back, which is about 6 trillion rupees has come back. The estimate is about 5 trillion rupees is still will end up being black money in cash, and therefore will get liquidated. That's about 3% of the economy. Now imagine 3% of the economy being pumped back into the economy. That's a lot of money. That's 3 percentage points of a $2 trillion economy. Clearly, it will bring down the cost of capital quite significantly. It will also ensure that businesses that emanate out of such capital also become clean. Because what was happening was that not all black money was lying idle. Some of it was actually being pumped back into businesses, which were again leading to a larger black economy getting created. Now all of that will be squeezed out, and legitimate economy without the distortions of black money will be coming out. And hence we foresee a much more well-structured economy coming out of this transformative exercise.
And inflation, like things of property, food, all of that, I think will get impacted based on this. Beyond carried out a survey asking about the measure, and it may be a bit skewed because obviously people were responding on social media platforms. 70% of the people came back saying they were positive about this. There were about 15 who said no to it, 13% believe it could have been handled better, and 2% said maybe it was a good thing. So a large part of the population, even though they are being impacted, seem to be looking at it positively. But this is that part of the population which uses social media, has access to smartphones, and may not be as impacted. But the lower sections of the population, do you think the impact of them on them has been larger?
Yeah, quite obviously, because they are the people who do not have plastic money. Quite a few of them have not been using bank accounts, even if they have a bank account. So they have been impacted, but I entirely agree with what your survey indicated, because even my anecdotal evidence from talking to people has been that even though people have found this entire measure to be less than convenient, they are happy with the measure. And I think one of the reasons for that obviously is that people generally would like to bring down people who have more wealth, more money, because the general perception is that a lot of the wealth and money has been acquired through means which are not entirely legal. I think the Germans have a word for this, no? I think it's called what, Schadenfreude, which basically means to enjoy the miseries of others. So this is that is one of the reasons why people, even though they feel that their daily lives are being disrupted, they yet feel that this measure was a sound one.
And their daily lives have been disrupted forever. They've been miserable for a long, long time, surviving on very, very little, barely hand to mouth on a day-to-day basis. So for them to actually see somebody suffering with crores of rupees sitting in their cupboards and their beds, I think it would probably be a good one for them. And going forward, they probably are hoping that they will actually get more share from the financial and the economic pie. Jaideep, what do we see going forward? How long do you think before we can go past this impasse?
I wouldn't have the answer to that, because that is something that the government would know and would talk about. My view is that the number that you talked about, 70% people supporting, I think if you had taken the poll a week earlier, there'll be more people supporting it. If you take the poll a week later, maybe patience will start running out and views will change, because clearly the benefits is not short term. So I'm actually delighted that the nation has shown the maturity to wait out for a long-term positive impact coming in and therefore supporting it. But that may change as we move forward, because after some time the short-term pains become more. And therefore the fight is between the red and the black. And what I mean by that is, does the benefit of black money outweigh the red that's coming up in corporate balance sheet, in SME balance sheets, in small businesses? If the red is more than the black, then we haven't achieved much. And therefore in that context, this cannot be a standalone one-time measure. There has to be multiple more steps followed up to make sure that the benefit of this particular step is really accrued eventually. This in tandem with GST, in tandem with agreements with other countries as part of the initiative of sharing information and taxation, initiatives such as GAR, POEM, BEPS, the base erosion profit shifting initiatives. I think all of that together will actually eventually squeeze out black money and will then benefit the poor eventually, because what will then happen is, once the cost of capital goes down, more people will be able to open up businesses, and when they open up businesses, they would need offices like this to operate out of. Because of black money coming out, even the office price will be coming down, the real estate price will be coming down, so it will be cheaper to set up businesses. Once they set up businesses, they'll be hiring people, and therefore more jobs will be created, more transactions will happen in the economy, and therefore more people will get benefited. And that's how the people who are standing in the queues right now and feeling the pain, they and their children will start getting benefited once this thing gets played out. But if it's a standalone one-time step, then there is no positive outcome to all the pain that we're going through.
Mr. Jha, you spent decades in the government of India. Do you think the Indian government is ready?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, the move was obviously a bold one, and the method adopted, the instrument adopted also, in my view, was a sound one. But I don't think we as a government really were well prepared to carry this out. And the reason why I'm saying this is that, see, if you are sucking out 86% of the liquidity from the system, then one has to be sure that you have in place enough cash to be able to pump in as soon as the system, as soon as you decide to withdraw that 86%. Now here, in my view, the two things which I think the government could have done better. One obviously was that instead of only printing 2,000 rupee notes in advance, they should have also printed 500 rupee notes in advance. And the argument that I hear people saying, then the secrecy would have been lost, I think is not quite a valid argument, because just as 2,000 rupee notes were printed in advance, everybody knew, it had come out in the newspapers also. We could have printed 500 rupee notes in advance, and RBI could have issued a statement that this is being, subsequently we will replace the old currency 500 rupee notes that are currently circulating, and nobody would have thought twice about it. Then we would have been prepared in terms of adequate currency to handle the withdrawal of 86% of the currency. The second thing that I think we could have done is that instead of announcing this measure on a Tuesday and then saying that banks are going to be closed the next day, which always creates a panic. The minute you say banks are going to be closed, people panic, they think that something is in short supply. If this measure had been announced on a Friday and before the second Saturday, Sunday when the banks are closed in ordinary course of business, then people, firstly the RBI would have had more time to pump out money to all four corners of the country, and secondly it would not have created the panic that it did, because in ordinary course of business people would have found that money is available in the banks where they go to. So I think that in my view the level of preparedness was not as high as it should have been.
A country as large as India, 1.3 billion people, approximately 200,000 ATM machines. The scale for anything that you'll end up doing is so large. It's almost impossible to really foresee. But at the same time, governments have to be responsible to its people. Thank you, Mr. Jha, for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya. The decision to move away from the old currency is definitive, and the Supreme Court of India has refused to intervene. But taking a step as large as this, where 86% of the floating currency is unusable, is not an easy one. It is ridden with challenges both personal for people and administrative for the government. Whatever be the outcome, the idea is to democratize the money, but nothing is absolute.